Welcome, class, to history and into chapter 4 of medieval Europe. Glad to be with you again today. Thank you those that are joining me and watching this video and following along. Those that are reading on your own, that's totally awesome. I'm glad that you are doing it and getting ahead. But if you're joining this video, I'm super grateful to have you here. And I'm excited to jump in to learn more about medieval Europe. And today we're going to be talking about Henry II. Okay, so before we start, we just talked about William the Conqueror in chapter 13. And so let's think about some of the medieval rulers and powerful people that we've learned about so far, such as Charlemagne, and then we just learned about William the Conqueror. And think about how they came to power. What are some things that they did? Well, we learned that they were great leaders, that they helped others. They were great military people like Charlemagne. Okay, and so these had an influence on the Christian church, specifically the Pope and the Bishop of Rome, in crowning a king or an emperor, right? So these powerful people had an influence on the Pope, and they ended up being, crowned a king or emperor. And they also had the military strength of certain rulers in defeating other rulers in war. So during these last few chapters, we learned about the feudal system and how power was usually given from father to son, right? So if I was an emperor, I had my little boy, I would be, it was my time to go, or it was my time to step down, I would be giving my power to him, and he would step up as ruler. And so, for example, we learned about the death of William's father in the last chapter, who had been the Duke of Normandy, and then William became the new Duke of Normandy. That's what we learned last time. So during this lesson, we'll learn about a king who inherited his throne when he was only 2 years old. And that's almost as old as my young son. I can't imagine him inheriting, the throne. And so during this time, this kingdom was chaotic. A lot of chaos and things were going bad because of the rule of his weak cousin, until the child turned 20. So in turn of this new person, this new king turned 20, he was considered old enough, so he didn't rule until he turned 20. So that's a little bit we're about to learn about. We're about to learn about a king who inherited the throne. So let's dive in by first pointing out the big question. Okay, so let's read this together, and it's here on screen. How did the shield tax benefit King Henry II and future kings? So I guess we're going to learn about a tax that's maybe called the shield tax, and then let's look for answers on how that benefited King Henry II and also future kings. Okay, so look out for things talking about the shield tax. All right, so let's begin and follow along with me. Weak kings and trouble in the land. King William died in 1087. Just as he had done, the kings that followed ruled England and parts of France. However, none of these kings were as strong as William the Conqueror, and that caused problems in England. We have these couple pictures. Let's read this depiction. It says, after King William died, various nobles fought for power. So this looks like a noble fighting for his power. So over time, various nobles, seeing that William's successors were weak, tried to seize power. And what is a successor? Well, let's look over to our right, and it says a person who becomes king, queen, or leader after the recent leader's death. So it looks like Joe Biden is going to be the successor to President Trump and be our next president. And so that is an example of a successor. So this led to constant warfare and a general breakdown of law and order. So people fighting to become power was bringing all this chaos. So without a strong king to hold them in line, these power-hungry lords fought each other and the king. For ordinary people, these were hard times. Armies robbed people and killed anyone who resisted. Lords needed money to fight their wars, so they increased taxes on their estates. Trade could not be conducted safely, so business suffered, right? It would be kind of hard to go out and sell things if you were scared to go out on the streets and possibly die. So our next section, a strong king makes order. Once again, as in 1066, a hero arrived from across the English Channel. Henry II was the great-grandson of William the Conqueror. When Henry was only 2, his grandfather, Henry I, died. Because of Henry's young age, the throne was taken by one of his cousins. However, when Henry was 21, he won the support of a number of nobles and was crowned king, Henry II in Westminster Abbey in December of 1154. Here's a picture. Looks like Henry II riding on clouds. Henry II challenged the lords who threatened him. Bright and well-educated, Henry spoke French and Latin, but he did not speak much English. Usually he was good-natured and gentle, but he was known to have a terrible temper. So let's learn a little bit more about Henry. A man of pleasure. Henry loved to hunt, and he loved to go hawking. Remember hawking, using hawks to help with hunting? Hawking was a sport that used, here, let's learn more about it, right? Hawking was a sport that used trained falcons and birds of prey to capture other birds. So these hunting birds were treated with care, like expensive hunting dogs. Henry loved to travel around with a favorite bird and perched on his leather glove, right? Perched, so like sitting right here. He and his nobles often brought their trained birds to the banquet hall and feed them treats. It'd be kind of cool to see. Okay, so let's learn. We're going to continue to learn more about Henry II. So the king is number 1. So Henry was full of energy and ideas. He was determined to end the wars that had plagued England. That's a good thing. He also intended to make sure the king would always be stronger than the lords who served him. That could be good, but also could cause a lot of contention, right? One of his first acts as king was to take to the field of battle and go after lords who had grown greedy and too powerful. Sounds like a Sir Lancelot right there, fighting others. But this was kind of an act of right, the king being number 1. He wanted to beat down those that were going against him, those that were greedy or too powerful. He wanted to kind of suppress those that might end up being trouble for him. Law and order. Henry soon realized that he needed more than a good army to be a strong leader. He needed laws and government to make sure the kingdom ran in an orderly manner. All right, so let's pause right there. Government. A government is a small group of people who have the authority to make rules for a much larger group, such as people living in a particular city, region, or country. So we have our federal government, right? Most of them are in DC. They rule or they govern all of the United States. And then we have our state and local governments, right? We have our governor and then our mayor. And they are a small group of people that have authority of how laws are, created or implemented in these areas. So Henry turned his attention to the way the laws and courts worked in England. Looks like royal appointed judges traveled to hear cases. So it looks like a royal judge right here hearing this case from maybe some serfs right here. The court system was very confusing. A court is a place where legal matters are presented and decisions made about disputes or people who have broken the law. Okay, so the court system was confusing. How are people supposed to solve these disputes or people that broke laws? So lords were in charge of the courts for certain types of crimes in certain places. The king was in charge of other courts, and the church was in charge of still others. There are also different types of trials. A trial is a legal process used to decide if a person is guilty or innocent. So if maybe you do something and the government's like that, shouldn't, or people say that's not right, you'd go to the court and be put on trial, and the court would decide through that trial if someone was guilty or innocent. So in some trials, people accused of crimes might be forced to prove their innocence through combat, or they might be forced to pick up a red-hot piece of iron with bare hand. Whew. If the hand didn't heal quickly, the person was considered guilty. That kind of sounds like some witchcraft or not witchcraft, but like I can't think of the word. Right? They used to think that if a woman didn't float in the water, she was considered, or if she did float, I can't remember, she was considered a witch or something. Some kind of, I can't think of the saying. Sorry, I'm going off track. Let's get back on track. That's my fault. All right, so what a mess. Henry II set up a group of administrators who could run the legal system. So with these trials in courts, there was a lot of confusion. So King Henry II put these administrators, which is a person responsible for carrying out the day-to-day workings of an organization. So he put these administrators in place to have things be less confusing and to run smoothly. He held several conferences with nobles and church leaders in these meetings. Henry ordered a fairer legal system and the right to trial by jury. Okay, so jury, we pause, is a group of people who listen to information presented during a trial in a court and make decisions about whether someone is guilty or innocent. Okay, so people that aren't judges, but a group of people from the community would come together, they would listen to the information, and then they would decide if that person was guilty, depending on the evidence. So the job of people on a jury is to first hear the evidence and then decide whether they think the accused person is guilty or innocent. And the jury system Henry began is still in use today, right? Trial by jury, you might have heard that. Okay, so we just have 2 more sections and we are done. So let's stay focused and finish this strong. So some other improvements that Henry made, some other changes in his effort to make the king more powerful. Remember how vassals owed their lord military service, right? We learned about vassals in the feudal system. So Henry felt there were too many times when this arrangement didn't work. Lords who were not fully behind the king did not always support him. They often sent fewer soldiers than he needed. Sometimes they completely ignored the king's request for military aid. Henry decided to change the law. He introduced the shield tax. The shield tax required lords to send money instead of soldiers. Henry then used the money to hire his own soldiers. His own soldiers would be ready to fight and would be loyal to him because he's paying them, right? Henry also started a program of rebuilding stone castles. Okay, so I hope you guys were paying attention to that. That would help you answer the big question. In our last section, okay, so we have dynasty. Let's learn out what dynasty is. And we learned about the dynasties of China, so maybe you remember. So a dynasty is a series of rulers who are all from the same family. Okay, so Henry and the kings who came after him were known as Plantagenet, okay? The Plantagenet dynasty, or rulers belonging to the same family. The Plantagenet probably came from a yellow flower called Planta genista that Henry's father liked to wear as a sort of badge or emblem. We have a family crest, and on our family crest is a turtle, so pretty awesome. They had a flower, a yellow flower on their badge or emblem. Henry II was the first Plantagenet king of England. Okay, so before we end, let's go back up to our big question, and let's read it together. So the big question says, how did the shield tax benefit King Henry II and future kings? So some key points that should be in there. Did it give a certain person more control? And did it reduce the power and authority of somebody else? Okay, so did it increase power to somebody and reduce power to somebody? And how did it do so? Those are some points and some hints to help you with your big question. Hope you guys are having a great week. It was awesome to have you guys here in this lesson. I hope you enjoyed learning about Henry II. And I will see you guys in the next chapter, chapter 15.